Introduction. My name is Gabby. I'm the Vice President of Service Delivery at Recruiter.com. I have 10 years of experience in the talent acquisition industry, working with startups to big Fortune 500 companies. At Recruiter.com, I have the ultimate pleasure of leading our service delivery team, who provide on-demand recruiters to clients and really manage those resources from start to finish with our programs. I have an amazing team I work with awesome clients, and I would be happy, of course, to service any recruiter or client who are interested in joining the Recruiter.com family. I am here with Liz Pike. We are so excited to have you on. Liz Pike is the Vice President of Green Rhino Recruitment. She has 16 years of payments industry experience, including corporate recruiting and hands-on roles in payments to really better understand the industry ecosystem. Liz is on the board of Merchant Acquirers Committee and WNet, a nonprofit focused on advancing diversity in payments. Green Rhino is primarily referral-driven and really works with payment facilitators, banks, software companies, startups, international companies, and anything payments or fintech related. Quite the introduction.
Sorry, I could have cut that bio down a little.
Now that we have the bios out of the way, we are certainly, of course, super excited and to have you on with us, Liz. I know you bring really a great perspective, certainly from the payment side of things and the recruitment side of things, and we are excited to get into some topics. So I'll just kick it off here. Something that certainly a lot of companies are seeing. We're seeing it with clients, we're seeing it in the market, but really between remote work and this hot candidate market, we're of course seeing some job hopping happening. Really now, we'd say 12 to 18 months is no longer a short window with an org. You know, people are hopping way soon before that, it feels like. How do you make sure they stick around and really not become a statistic? What are some insights into that?
Yeah, great question. Statistic is I think the word that we're dealing with here, because a lot of people are jumping around and taking new jobs, not just for new money, but because they feel they're just a statistic. They've been dehumanized. And I know the topic of this session was mind the gap. So I want to kind of zoom out and talk big picture. Yes, this is what's happening now, is that some companies are experiencing higher turnover. I even heard the phrase quiet quitting and then had to look it up and learn that that just means doing your job within the hours of doing your job. So I think we might need to reframe this paradigm. So if we zoom out, essentially, since the late 1970s, the average worker has had about a 6% raise. If we adjust for everything else, the average leader, the CEO, has had like over 1,000% increase, right? So, and if you look at big picture, a study from the Institute for Policy Studies in June 2022 showed that 300 of the top hiring companies in the US had a 670 to 1 gap. So the average CEO received $670 in compensation for every $1 a worker received. 49 firms, that ratio was above 1,000 to 1. And that's up from 2 years ago in 2020, which is 604 to 1. That's the highest in the world.
Yeah.
So they also found that median wages did not keep pace with inflation. So big picture, you have a lot of people who have been working very, very hard. And now with remote work, they have the opportunity to make more working from home, maybe with a better work-life balance, maybe losing the time in their commute, and it's worth it to them. So what I think we're seeing currently is a migration of talent from companies that aren't a fit for those workers or employees to places where they're a long-term fit for employees. Because another, and I'm getting kind of off topic now, but I get texts all the time from clients who will say, you know, a CEO might say, here's another CEO in, you know, that's hiring a lot, that's trying to bring workers back to the office, or here's one that's doing layoffs. The market should kind of level out. It shouldn't be so tight for talent. But what's happening is really good people are going to places where they feel valued. And sometimes that even means taking a pay cut. So it's not all about the money. So even if all the largest companies kept saying, we're going to do things exactly the same way we've been doing, what you're going to see big picture is a migration towards from top talent and anyone who, you know, anyone who wants to change their career path to companies that are putting their values in a slightly different place. I don't know if that answered your question, but I will stop talking.
No, that's really a great and interesting perspective to take on this. I can even say from just our experience and my experience in service delivery with our clients, there are much more backfills that we're seeing versus new roles, new jobs with our clients. And some of that may be to your point of really top talent becoming a bit more picky and choosy and really wanting to align themselves to their values. And to be honest, I think the article you're referencing around quiet quitting, or I think I read that same article, and it's interesting to see how that's not only a shift, that kind of maybe we saw coming with burnout levels and whatnot, but also with the younger talent coming up through post-secondary education and now entering the workforce and managing to their expectations, which is much more aligned with wanting to work just their 9 to 5, you know, having that work-life balance, et cetera. But I think just the whole market as a whole is also leaning a bit more into that and leaning into a bit more being value focused and focused on their work-life balance, et cetera. So
it's interesting you mentioned the younger generation, because earlier this week I texted some people that I knew that were in different situations, and I also asked a recruiter friend of mine who's the people I texted were like 25 and under. And several of them had stayed with their company, even though they had received competitive offers and they had gotten promotions and things like that. And so I was asking, you know, what made you stay with your company? And I got, let me pull up the bullet points here. Basically, one of them said, well, several of them said, I'll just read a few of them out. I kept loyal and engaged to my company because of the very healthy work-life balance they promoted. Another person says, work-life balance has been top priority because I suffer from depression. So I need to know I could work on my own timeline, work on myself, and still have a life. The third person said, the people and culture, and letting workers know that they can grow in any direction they want, career pathing. And I actually think that's not just the case with younger employees at all. I run my own company. Since COVID, I've been able to work from home. I could have taken ownership at a different company and probably made more money in the short term, but I have diagnosed complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so that means sometimes, especially if I'm doing therapy or something, I might get ill afterwards. And so I think in opening things up to remote, we're not just saying, young people, we're helping you. There's a variety of people. There's a ton of top performers that have invisible illnesses or need help caring for their kids or parents or whatever. And it really comes down to treating workers with the same respect that you would treat yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. And I think it's really an awesome thing to kind of take back, you know, from an employee perspective, to kind of put the ball back in your court with, well, setting those boundaries around working time, et cetera. So no, awesome points. Sorry, I'd love to switch up kind of the topic to chat a bit about salary, and to chat a little bit about salary being a huge factor, and it really becoming more of a norm for companies to disclose that at the beginning. And since we're on, you know, really the topic of retention strategy and hiring strategy, what do you advise companies to do to ensure equal pay, especially now that we're in more of a global market, when it comes to remote work? Companies now realizing that there is excellent talent really around the world. How would you kind of go about that or advise on that?
Well, I think in terms of being competitive with salary, you need to make sure that you understand not just what the employee is looking for now for their immediate job, but also for their career path. It's not just a competitive salary. What's interesting is even though salaries are going up and compensation is going up, working in payments and fintech, I have placed multiple people when the salaries have been either lateral or slightly less than that they were making. And that is because they were not happy in their role, whether it be the culture, the role, the hours. A lot of people got, you know, if we're talking about quiet quitting, let's talk about quiet promotions. A lot of people got promotions, but then didn't get paid for those and ended up working. I talked to someone yesterday who said, I've been working 80-hour weeks. And so I think that instead of looking at it as just salary, look at it as everything. And just like we disclose what the culture's like, what the PTO time is like, what the role is in terms of interacting with people internally or externally, we need to disclose the salary. So a lot of companies are having to do that because different states are doing that. And I also think it's okay to disclose a range and say, depending on experience, because sometimes some companies will say, well, we could hire, let's say, I don't know, a senior product manager or a product manager too, depending on their skill set. It's okay to say in the job description, this is the range. But even when before kind of this trend of displaying salaries was out there, which is really just clear communication. When I would reach out to people about jobs, and my team I would include the context, the culture, the salary, and then if they were flexible and why. And so I think we can do that, but I think people are thinking of this as the power is shifting to the employee or worker, whereas before the power was in the execs. And that's the wrong way to think about it. Instead of thinking about it as a hierarchy, think about it as people at a table and what would they want. And what I have found is I've seen people, because a lot of people call me and say, you know, I've got these jobs that are offering me something, but my company's come back and said this, what do? I walk them through. It doesn't always come down to the money. However, if we're talking about just salary increases, okay, well, look at how inflation has increased. Look at how, so that leads into cost of living. Look at how corporate profits have increased, and look at how exec salaries have increased. It doesn't make sense to expect all that and look at the productivity increases that have been happening in the past 50 years and then say, and we can't increase salary. Like, you really have to look at business as, yes, a way to make revenue, but also a way to keep society going. Mm-hmm. Not just a way to push your employees as far as possible. I think the pandemic turning to remote work showed that we've opened a door we're not coming back from, and people wanted to be treated more equitably.
Yeah. And how do you apply that to a global market? Like, I'm just thinking like now that we have seen this shift towards hiring around the world, like, do you have any thoughts on pay equity as well as a global phenomenon, or like as something now that markets for candidates are opening up to the broader range? Like, I can tell you with some of the clients we're seeing, definitely they're open to help that isn't just locally based. They're open to help that's maybe in Canada across the border, or down in Latin America, or
I mean, one of my employees lives in Porto, you
yeah,
know. I think we are seeing that as a trend. When you see that, when you see people, you know, working in Europe or other areas, you're also absorbing the culture with that. So I don't know if you work on more full-time or contract roles. I've seen with full-time roles, they like to have people in other countries, but sometimes those people are expecting, okay, here's a standard vacation package, here are my work hours, here is this. So a lesser salary doesn't always balance out. I'm seeing it as a trend, but I think there's also a lot of I was talking with a top network company, a large global network company the other day, and they told me, their head of HR told me, we have a bunch of jobs, not all of them we can fill in other areas, because even though we have those areas, they're not set to support US employees. And then that would mean a change in our taxes if we're taking US people and putting them there. So I think people are working through that. But yeah, I think we're going to see a migration of talent to some overseas depending, but I think remote is going to be the key.
yeah, awesome. Another kind of discussion to kind of chat about, but we're talking about retention and what should companies do to have a competitive advantage when hiring. So what specifically is Green Rhino doing? I can certainly speak to recruiter.com, but what are you seeing, and how do we position ourselves to have more of a competitive advantage, especially in the market that we're seeing?
Okay, great. And I'd love to talk about that. And I noticed the two questions that we have also deal with that. One says, should companies be paying one set of salaries if you live, say, in the Bay Area versus if you live outside? And so another one said, can you please provide a source of these stats? I'm happy to provide a summary with the stats after this and get that to recruiter.com so we can get that out. In terms of different locations having different salary bands, yeah, 100% cost of living changes are still a thing. I think where that can get tricky is with roles that have a large bonus component and then the base is so low. So there, I mean, cost of living, yeah, you have to think about that. But I also think with remote work, we're seeing that as less of a factor. And I'm also seeing some people in more expensive cities moving to less expensive areas right outside the city. So it's just a really interesting time. I'm having a lot of conversations with people who are saying, I've been making X amount of money. I could go down to making Y amount of money because here are the values that are more important to me. So even though salaries are going up, and that will happen, you're still going to see the differences in location from country to country or city to city. In terms of your question on how can people be competitive when hiring for salary, this goes so much farther than salary. And the reason I say that is we take on a lot of roles, you know, and a lot of those are in the 200 to 500 total comp, but a lot are 6 figures or under, or somewhere in between. And regardless of the salary, I am seeing a pattern of people saying, here's what I've been earning at my top, or here's what I've been earning. The culture is more important to me. So I want to kind of talk about the culture in terms of what companies can avoid, because that goes right to retaining employees. It's not just about money. People would rather take less money. In fact, one of the pieces of feedback that I got from one of the young people I reached out to, he said, I feel like I don't want to work in a place that's not inclusive. If I don't agree with the rules or culture, my perspective is kept off to the side. And so I thought it was interesting, and I'll put this in the summary as well. But earlier this year, in January of 2022, MIT did a review, Dr. Donald Saul and Charles Saul, and they did a review of, I want to say, over 300,000 employees and reviews. And they showed that eliminating toxic environments is the number one thing you can do to retain employees. And they said in smaller companies, that could be down to the owner or the leader, but in larger companies, it can come down to managers in different departments. And they said the toxic 5 are, in case you're wondering, exclusionary behavior. So like non-inclusive behavior is the single largest predictor of someone wanting to leave. Being disrespectful is number 2. Unethical behavior like dishonesty, low integrity, not complying with regulations is 3. Cutthroat is 4. And abusive management behavior is 5. So when we look at that, what's interesting about that is Stanford did a study looking at just the physical health only of employees in toxic environments. And they found that physically, if you're in a toxic environment, your chances of being diagnosed with like a cardiac, a stroke, something physical are 35 to 55% higher. So I think what we're seeing is employees are people, leaders are people realizing this and then saying, here's what I want to do. And what's interesting about the toxic behavior is in some of the, when I was texting some of the people that I knew that were younger and said, what made you stay with your company instead of go somewhere else, even though you could have gotten maybe more pay? This person said, the majority of people are motivated by connecting with other people, contributing in a meaningful way, and getting their basic needs met. So employers need to support workers in pursuit of things outside of life. And workers don't want to have to struggle to survive or fight off others. And that goes back to that cutthroat management. So I do think that salary is important. I do think that especially in industries where salary has been really low and executive leadership salary has been getting higher and there are profits, salary is just going to need to rise. And I do think that employers only help people by being transparent with it. I will say for like anyone who's looking, employees or workers, I do know some people will say, don't disclose your salary when you're negotiating. And I think that can come across as defensive and shut things down. I think you're better off giving an estimate, saying something like, I was making in the low to mid 100s. However, I was paid under market rate, but I'm also interested in this role, the career path, the culture, and the company. So could you share with me the range and maybe we can see if there's a fit in there? Like, that's how I think we should address it. But I don't think we're going to go back to not sharing salaries.
Yeah, I think we've passed that mark so clearly, and it's such a standard process for so many like hiring companies who are hiring that it's an expectation now. And I think it would be best for certainly a lot of folks to pick up that best practice when it comes to hiring. So Thank you so much,
And
Liz.
that also ties into a trend that I've been seeing. Sorry, is it okay to interrupt you?
Oh yeah, no worries. We'll
Okay,
get into Q&A. But yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, that also ties into a trend that we've been seeing in terms of, even though there's work remote, a lot of companies are doing software, like tracking software, like real-time individualized tracking software. And sometimes that results in things like they're tracking your keyboard strokes, they're tracking your, they might be doing a screenshot every hour or something like that. The downside to that, when I heard about that, is not only will some people then like try to game the system, you know, I heard something about mouse jigglers to like, and or you know, maybe not get paid for something if, say, their kid messages them or they have to take a call or answer the door when the screenshot comes through, so they don't want to submit that hour. Aside from that, we need to think about what the actual job is and what the human requires to get that done. And sometimes that is thinking and assessing. Sometimes that is writing things out on paper. Sometimes that is printing something long form and reading it and digesting it. And I think that it's interesting because one of the creators of the tracking software ended up using it several years later and said it made him more anxious and distrust the software. And I think this goes back to trust. And you have to find employers that trust their employees and treat them equitably. I saw a question in the chat that said, how do you find companies that have a bigger purpose than make lots of money? We all need money to live. But what I have found is when you're interviewing with companies or within teams, if it's internally, asking people, you know, what have made the top performers in the past 5 years really stand out, and then also asking for the people that have left within the past year or 2 years, what were some of the common factors? And I think by the hiring manager or employer talking you through those, you can learn a lot about the culture and about how they value their employees.
Yeah, great, amazing. We will answer a couple of questions. So we're open to Q&A now. Please feel free to add any questions you have in the Q&A box. But we'll start off with a couple here. We've already addressed a couple of these ones, but we did get a question, and I certainly have some information on this, but when do you think HR will have a real seat at the table today? Sales has revenue numbers, marketing has key metrics, finance has key metrics, marketing has mind share percentage, and HR has ? Employee happiness. If turnover is so high, why isn't this part of the C-suite discussion? And one thing that I'm certainly seeing with clients, and I've seen this shift over the time, definitely that I've been in TA over the past 10 years, and it has been a shift towards more data-driven hiring. So we're seeing more and more in the industry now, roles in recruitment operations, roles in recruitment analytics, roles that are taking hiring, making it a lot more data-driven. And so those conversations at the C-suite level, at the executive management level, are more data-driven around their hiring. There's not just turnover as a number now. There's also, you know, comparison to diversity of your internal workforce to the market. There's a lot of other data that's been, I feel like, driven from recruiting and hiring and talent acquisition that now is coming more and more to the forefront. And I'd say C-suite and executives are asking more questions about it because they are seeing turnover. They are seeing that a lot of their teams aren't being able to hire fast enough in some of the market, you know, in some of the market that we're in right now. So yeah, a really, really great question. Do you have any other thoughts on that one, Liz?
I love your answer. And from my perspective, I would love the people side of things, or HR, to get back to having kind of that voice. I think that when I started recruiting in 2006, I then kind of saw the slow progression of, we're bringing HR in, we're listening as a voice. And then after the recession, cutting HR as the first thing when, when costs are tight. And now we've seen an uptick in DEI and other type of roles. I think I'll just speak from my experience, because I have worked as a corporate recruiter and I work with corporate recruiters, but people come to me and say, can you help me fill this job? In the past, I have gone out of my way to help candidates and clients, even if they weren't a fit for us, in sending referrals, sharing my network, leveraging whatever I can. As a result, both during the height of the pandemic, the start, and now when the market has gotten tighter with availability of candidates, I have not had any kind of problem with me or my team hearing back from candidates and getting them interested in roles, even if they are not actively looking. I think the reason for that has been that I have always treated them like people and given them feedback and helped them.
Yeah.
I think if we can change kind of the idea, it's great that we have stats and it's great that we have a lot of AI and data, but also if we're making decisions based on the data we have, and some of those decisions are biased or the hiring process is broken, like we need to get the person element in there. So I am seeing more of a focus on these types of experts. I hope that continues. But I think it comes down to, just like retaining an employee, to get a worker, you have to be treating them like a person. So I think if you as a company have had your process to ghost a lot of candidates or something like that, it'll be harder. You'll have to it's not impossible though, because people are people. So reaching out to them and saying, hey, we have this new leadership, here's what we're doing. That's a way to get proactive people.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, there is certainly in all we do, that human element that can't be ignored, right? That can't be ignored. We're dealing with people here. We're dealing with candidates. I hope more companies are making pushes towards keeping that at the forefront, but also looking at some of the data and statistics to be realistic when it comes to their hiring.
And I feel like some of the progress that we made during the height of the pandemic, and recognizing people are people and are working remotely and have other needs, I feel like some of that's been rolling back. As I have traveled, I've heard multiple execs say, I wish people were more in the office, and because there's so much learning you can do. And I said, yeah, I get that. But if someone's making, say, under $150,000, it's probably harder for them in this market to live close to the office, to get daycare, to do XYZ. And you might have people who are more productive remotely. In fact, research shows, I'll put it in the sheet that we get out, that it's just as effective as raises, and just as important is bringing your employees together once or twice a year, face to face. And there shouldn't be an agenda, even just food or socializing, so that they can build that trust while continuing to work remotely from home. So I hope more companies embrace that.
For sure. We will wrap things up with one final question, and we'll both kind of give a quick thought on this. But the question here that stood out to me, because we've been talking about this really throughout our webinar, is what do you think will happen to companies who don't try to fix toxic cultures, offer flexible benefits, or adopt these new open mindsets? What's your quick roundup on that?
It's happening now. They'll have a much harder time hiring. The employees that they do have may eventually go elsewhere, and they won't have the talent that's as competitive, and it'll turn into a vicious cycle if they are in a toxic environment where they are blaming the employees or the results for not being fast enough, and it'll just kind of spiral out, unfortunately. Not that that can't be changed, but that's what I meant about a slow migration.
Yeah.
Is these options are available elsewhere, and some people are even choosing to leave their jobs and do some gig work and contracting work and something else because of how they're being treated. So I think we really need to look at how our respect for others as a key component to solving this.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for Liz, for hopping on with us, sharing your insights. I've had an absolute pleasure chatting with you.